I had an issue this week that required me to call a customer service 800 number. And as always happens, I got the message saying, please hold the line at the end of this call so that you can take part in a brief survey. As soon as the call got started, it really didn't turn out the way I hoped it would. It started from the very beginning when I said, I'm having a little trouble accessing my account on the website. And the customer service rep said, well, what web browser are you using? And I said, let's see, I'm using Firefox. And he went, oh boy. He said, download Chrome. You should be doing this on Chrome. So I said, all right. So I started to download Chrome onto my computer, and then he said, what's your PIN? And I gave him the PIN, and he said, you should never give your PIN over the phone. So then the issue centered around two different codes that I needed to report. So I said, now I've got these 4 items. These 3 are using this code, and then this other one is using a different code. He said, that's impossible. I said, well, all right, tell me again where to look on the invoice. Well, it's right here. And I said, all right, well, these numbers are almost identical, but this one ends in a 2, and the others end in a 4. And he said, that's not possible. You're obviously looking in the wrong place. And then he said, are you still downloading Chrome? I said, it's taking a little bit of time, yeah. I said, I'll be done soon. He goes, well, why don't you just hang up and call back if you need more help? And I said, well, actually, I'm not done needing your help. Would it be possible for you to just hold the line while we finish downloading Chrome? And he said, I don't have that much time. And that's when it hit me. I get to do a survey at the end of this. And I salivated a little, you know? Jesus addresses moments just like that one. What shall I do? I asked myself. Jesus says, bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. Even in a situation like this, yes. As you and I both know, those aren't even the hardest situations. I'll never see that guy again. I never saw him to begin with. But there are situations way harder than that one. And Jesus says, pray for people who treat you poorly. Bless people who are cursing at you. It's an amazing teaching. I found myself thinking, what if this were the litmus test that they offered for becoming a Catholic Christian? What if this is how I knew if I were Catholic or not? If I loved my enemies, if I forgave people who mistreated me? I don't know how I would do if that were the test. How would you do? And what's interesting is, when you hear a gospel like this, there's no poetry in it. Jesus isn't speaking in some poetic way. It's very clear. It's plain language. Here's what I want you to do. What's interesting is, like the example I just gave, that customer service representative was objectively doing a bad job. I mean, mistreating the customer is the opposite of the job. But the question is, so what should I do about that? I have a right to be angry with that person. I have a right to feel offended or have a grievance or a resentment about the way I was treated. And Jesus does not deny that we have a right to that. Jesus doesn't say you shouldn't feel that way. We have a right to those feelings, but he's saying don't exercise your right to revenge, to misery. Yeah, you have every right, but why would you exercise that right? That's not going to help you, and that's not going to make the world better. Jesus says that is not God's way. And if you decide to exercise that right, you're going to be drawing negativity to you like a magnet. Why would you want to do that, he asks us. Sometimes when the news is getting me down and I'm feeling overwhelmed by things, I find that the internet can actually be a place of comfort if you know what to look for. Sometimes I will search for stories of forgiveness. There's a lot of them, you know. There's a lot of stories out there of people who have forgiven unbelievable things. And because I was preparing for the homily this week, I Googled amazing stories of forgiveness, and boy, did I find one. It's a random thing that came up in my feed, and it just was about a woman whose son was murdered 12 years ago. And at the time of the filming of this, she had just been getting this impulse to go visit her son's killer. That was somebody that she hated. The son that she lost was an only child. She was absolutely devastated by the loss. And she had been filled with anger and venom and revenge for him for 12 years. So when this feeling came that said, go visit him, she didn't understand it, but she couldn't shake it, so she did. And there's this incredible footage of her with him. It turns out that as she got to know him, she learned about what a disaster his life was, what a horrible childhood he had, how many things in his life had gone wrong. And she wound up developing a soft spot for him, so much so that she became almost like a second mother to him, a first mother in a way, because his first mother wasn't there for him. And when he got out of jail, she was the one who went to greet him and help him get settled in his new life. Years later, when she was dying, it was he who was by her deathbed. And she said to him, "It's time for me to say goodbye to you and say hello again to my son." It's an amazing story. So I looked at the comments to the story, and I saw lots of them that expressed how I felt. I've got goosebumps. This woman is amazing. What a living saint. But those weren't the only comments. Maybe you won't be surprised to hear that many people very much disapproved of this woman. And they said things like this: "She owes her dead son more than this. She should be ashamed of herself. She's clearly just trying to replace her son with someone else. There should be no mercy for killers. I hope he rots in hell." It surprised me to hear how many people felt that way. But what was interesting is you could pick up from reading the comments cues and certain jargon that let me know that some of the people writing that were Christians. I could tell that they were because they used terms like Judgment Day, and they referred to God and Jesus sometimes. And I thought to myself, they must have never heard this gospel before, because Jesus is just so clear, so plain spoken about it. And let's face it, he's not telling us that woman didn't have a right to revenge, didn't have a right to hate that person. He's not denying her right. He's saying, why would she want to go there? What would it do for her? He's encouraging us to not exercise that right and to not indulge in those feelings that are natural and instinctual, but are not good for us. Years ago, when I was first ordained and I was assigned in Oneonta, I was called to anoint someone who was a hospice patient, not an unusual thing for a priest to do. And when I got to the house, I was so sad to see that when the wife came to the door, she was young, and there were teenage kids there. The person who was dying was not old at all. And I wanted to connect with them, so I asked the wife, "How long have you been married?" And she said, "Well, we were married for 10 years, and we've been divorced for 15. And I said, "Oh, and you live together?" She said, "No, this is my house. He's lived elsewhere for 15 years. And I said, "How beautiful for you to take care of your ex." And she said, "I'm not taking care of my ex." She said, "I'm taking care of another human being." She said, "He hurt me very badly, and I don't know if I'll ever forgive him." She said, but I couldn't allow him to die alone. He's the father of my kids. And so, of course, I took him in. I have a spiritual director who's a sister of St. Joseph, and she says something very wise. She says, after you've been injured, you shouldn't push on your bruises to see if they still hurt. I see you know what she means by that. Don't push on the bruises, she says, because they do still hurt. And if you press on them, you'll feel it. If you leave them alone, they'll be okay. And there's always going to be those times when, without any notice or warning, you're going to bump into something that hits the bruise and it hurts all over again. But she says, don't press on the bruises yourself. And I think of that woman when I hear that advice. There's no way that if she were pressing on her bruises, she could have ever brought him into her home. She could have rehearsed all the reasons why he's getting just what he deserves and why no skin off my back and all of that. She had to make a decision not to press on the bruises so that she could do what maybe God had intended to be the crowning glory of her whole life, to take care of someone who had hurt her. So this week, we are being encouraged to ask ourselves, have I bought into the thinking that when someone's hurt me, I owe it to myself to hate them? I owe it to myself to get revenge? Have I bought into that? Because there's a lot of people in our society that will tell us that's the way that it works. But Jesus says that's not the way it has to be. Is there a chance that we could not exercise our right to resentment or to hatred and grievance? He's asking us, do you really want to exercise that right? Especially when you know that if you give up judging, you won't be judged. If you forgive, you'll be forgiven. The measure with which we measure gets measured back to us.